And our top story tonight, Robert Mueller desperate to keep his presidential subversion mission going, while Rhino Republicans have developed a strange strain of schizophrenia in the increasingly absurdist Russia witch hunt. With the credibility of his all-Democrat Dem team shredded, and even Dems and the deep state warning him not to interfere in the midterm elections, Special Counsel Mueller is now fully focused on taking the farce he leads to new levels. Obstruction of justice, the call now. Mueller already knows he has zero chance of indicting a sitting president, period. And yet he has apparently come up with a new direction for his incomprehensible and confused investigation, focusing now on a meeting between President Trump and his Attorney General, a meeting in which the president asked Sessions to reconsider his recusal in the Russia case. Even Rhino Trey Gowdy, no friend of the president and a committed establishmentarian, admitted Sessions never should have taken the Attorney General job if he intended to recuse himself. But as is the Rhino way, Gowdy found a quick way to return to his form and defend the FBI's action in planting a spy in the Trump presidential campaign.
I am even more convinced that the FBI did exactly what my fellow citizens would want them to do when they got the information they got, and that it has nothing to do with Donald Trump.
If you can believe that, extraordinary piece of reasoning. Here to sort it all out, attorney Victoria Toensing, founding partner at Digenova Dan Bongino. Victoria, great to have you with us. I mean, when I saw Trey Gowdy say that, I was stunned because even by his standards, that's confused. It is absolutely absurd, and it's contradicted and contravened by history.
Well, as I understand it, they didn't see documents. They just got a briefing. So they're to rely on a briefing. I don't trust nothing until I see the documents. And so I don't know why he's out spewing this stuff when he sounds incredible. And he also says, in the same thing, well, if the president doesn't have anything to hide, he should just sit down with Mueller. No, give me a break. It's spoken like somebody who's never been a defense attorney, which he hasn't. And if he were and gave that advice to Trump, he could be sued for ineffective assistance of counsel. Let me tell you about Scooter Libby. You know what? I'll do it in a nutshell. He came into the grand jury and said X, and a journalist said Y. And guess what? Scooter got indicted, and he didn't have anything to hide at all. This is ridiculous. I'm going to just quote Jim Comey about this. He says, if a prosecutor doesn't know his case in a year, he should be fired because he's incompetent. And now it's been a year, and Mr. Mueller, it should be over.
You know, Victoria, I think you're exactly right. But this goes beyond that. As all of us in the media, left or right-wing media, whatever you want to call it, is all of us following this, citizens by the tens of millions, watching their president being pursued, persecuted, when there is on its face just nothing to the case whatsoever. And as you say, it's not only been a year for the special counsel, but that special counsel case is built on over almost a year of investigation by the FBI. And
that's right, so it's 2 years.
Everyone knows there is nothing there by the admission of the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, by the report of the House Intelligence Committee, and the special counsel himself has come forward with nothing within the scope of the mission.
Let me add one more point, Lou,
Sure.
that is also important, because Trey was an assistant U.S. attorney out in South Carolina, but he doesn't know Maine justice. I do. I was deputy assistant AG there, and I know what cartwheels and angst everyone went through to even open an investigation against a member of Congress. I can tell you that to open this investigation against a presidential campaign within months of the election had to go to the Attorney General, if not to the White House. This is not done lightly in the Department of Justice, and Trey doesn't know. He doesn't know diddly squat about what the rules are for opening an investigation into a presidential campaign.
And Gowdy is a lame duck. So it's almost like he's job hunting out there as he gets ready for his term in Congress to end. I mean, the man is confused just in his own narrative. Let's turn to that narrative, that the people would want a spy planted in a presidential campaign if there were Russian meddling. Don't you think that it would be the first thing you would expect of the FBI is first to stop the meddling and to go after the Russians who were doing the meddling? And instead, we had a president in President Obama who did absolutely nothing, an FBI, a CIA, an NSA who, as best we can tell, knew not a thing about what the Russians were doing and were absolutely impotent to stop it, to thwart them, or anyway defend the interest of the United States.
Well, here's the proper protocol. They should have gone to the presidential campaign and told them that they were fearful that the Russians were trying to infiltrate, meddle, whatever it is, term, verb they want to use, and ask for their support. And they did not do that. Why? Because they were busy making up the evidence to frame the president. That's what they were doing. That's what this is all about. Talked about it for about 6 months now. There was a brazen plot to frame President Trump, then the presidential candidate.
And I think you're exactly right. But all of this understood. All of this now understood by the American people, and yet the special counsel goes on. And we now are watching the Dems and the deep state in Washington, in particular, divide over the issue of whether there was a spy in the campaign or an informant, as if that is a distinction that amounts to a difference. The narrative is now turned. They were simply trying to protect the Trump campaign, and watch out for Russians, even as they did not do a thing, as far as we know, any investigation whatsoever of the Russian offensive, largely a cyber offensive against the United States.
Yeah, one of the reasons they say was that General Flynn got $45,000 for a speech paid for by Russia. Well, Bill Clinton got $500,000 on a speech from Russia. Where were they in there protecting the Clintons from the Russians, for goodness sake?
And as you mentioned, the president getting a $500,000 speaking fee, we cannot forget that almost $145 million went into the coffers of the Clinton Foundation, and by any reasoning of any kind of honesty, there was a connection, a pay-for-play that went right back to Uranium One and the scandal that followed, with Robert Mueller, by the way, acting as errand boy to the Russians during the entire event.
Mueller was the FBI director at that time.
Yes. And here we go, as if this is, we're supposed to pretend that all of this makes sense, Victoria. Is there not at large in this country any spirit that says, when you are confronted by the absurdity, the obvious lies, the obvious crimes that have been committed, and the obvious dereliction of duty and failure to intercede in a Russian offensive against the U.S. elections and the interests of this country, there was not a single person in the intelligence community that was they were so sure of Trump's collusion with Russia, but they couldn't figure out what was happening in real time and couldn't mount a counteroffensive? That's stunning.
Well, here again is where Trey Gowdy is really off track. He says, well, let's just let the investigation take it where it needs to go. No, the president has to be president, and he's been harmed by this ever since the first day he took office. He cannot make a decision about Russia without having it second guessed because of the Russian collusion. He's got to make decisions about Russia. I mean, Barack Obama did. He was doing reset, which failed. But the president still has to deal with Russia. He has to deal with foreign leaders. They read the papers. They have to come in and say, hey, are you going to be here next year at this time? That takes away his leverage with them. This is affecting the presidency, and it's got to stop.
And it's obviously the purpose of both the special counsel, the Democratic Party, and the deep state, which is to subvert this administration. And they certainly, if they have their way, will not stop with this special counsel witch hunt.
And this obstruction of justice, Lou, this obstruction of justice is ridiculous.
Well, I haven't talked to an attorney who I respect that thinks that there is any possibility of prosecuting a president for obstruction of justice in any form. Period.
Well, he could, yes, if they said, oh, destroy evidence. But the tutorial on obstruction of justice, it's you have to willfully interfere with the process of justice by threatening a witness. I'm reading it from the law books. Influencing or impeding a witness. Now, what impeding did the president asking the attorney general to unrecuse himself? It didn't affect the investigation in any way whatsoever.
And doesn't go to the intent. And
embarrassing legally. It's embarrassing that Mueller doesn't know better than this.
And powerfully, there has never been a president either ever indicted for obstruction of justice, ever charged with obstruction of justice,
you can't
let
indict
alone
a sitting
successfully
president.
prosecuted. What?
Can't indict a sitting president, so
No.
there.
Nope. Another little problem for this special counsel. All right,
Yes.
Victoria, as always, instructive. Great to have you with us. Thanks so much. Victoria
Bye.
Toensing.
And frankly, I've always liked Trey.
It was
Shame on
created.
Trey Gowdy.
It was created. Oh, please don't even bring up Trey Gowdy tonight. That idiotic comment that he made last night and this morning about everything was done by the book. This is ludicrous. This was a false narrative created by the FBI and the CIA to plant intelligence overseas with Americans who were then feeding it back to the United States in emails and phone calls. And the FBI took that information and used it to get a false narrative in front of the FISA courts to get warrants. This is disgraceful. You know what? When Trey Gowdy was briefed the other day, they did not get to see one single document. How can you possibly say the things that he has said in the last 24 hours without seeing any documents? This is ludicrous.
Let me ask you, and everybody in the media, oh, he's just an informant. These are just informants. You met Carter Page in the green room last night.
Sure.
Sam Clovis and Michael Caputo. They're spies. You found the definition first.
Yeah, I mean, if you look up the definition and you put it on the screen, it defines exactly what the FBI was using this man for, to infiltrate the campaign, to induce and, in my judgment, entrap people into saying things that were incriminating. They never did, because there was nothing incriminating to say. There was no collusion. That's exactly why nobody has ever been charged with this fictitious crime of collusion.
There is no such thing.
There is none.
Sad. All right, guys, good to see you. We're waiting for your book, Joe. Always good to see you.
Reporting the FBI and DOJ's briefing of key lawmakers last week about that informant in the Trump presidential campaign. Well, it's typical of today's screaming headlines. ABC's website blared, "Gowdy disputes Trump spy claim, says FBI acted properly." But that ignores a number of key points Oversight Chair Trey Gowdy made on Fox last night. The first was that the DOJ made clear that the president was not and is not a target of the Russia investigation, despite the Democrats' constant disinformation on that point. Gowdy also could not explain why the FBI did not simply do that defensive briefing of the Trump campaign instead of relying on an informant inside his campaign. On The Angle last night, former federal prosecutor Andy McCarthy laid out his theory.
There's no question that they spied on the campaign. If you were looking at a corporation and you thought that the corporation was being corrupted by 3 people, you would go to the CEO and say, I think we have a problem here. We need your cooperation. What they did instead was send covert operatives to pry information out.
Now, this is why a number of conservatives are unhappy that Gowdy kind of muddied the waters or would downplay Trump's spy claims. One of them is Dan Bongino of NRI TV. And also joining us is Daniel Goldman, former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. Great to see both of you. Dan Bongino, first, let's go to you on this. We invited Gowdy on the show. We want him to come on. I think he's a really smart guy. A little confusing, kind of the way he approached this issue, although a little bit misrepresented, I think, in the press. But where do you come down on what he said specifically about the SPYGATE question?
No, I think Gowdy's appearance was disgraceful. I think you're being nice to him. I understand that, Laura, but Gowdy's appearance is now being used as propaganda by the left. And what he said was so completely out of line and factually incorrect. Laura, let's just run through some basic facts here, okay? So according to Gowdy, the FBI ran it by the book, how the Americans would have wanted them to run the investigation. Really? So why didn't they notify Congress for 8 months, Laura? 8 months about the investigation when prior procedure was to notify Congress quarterly on sensitive investigation. You know, another question for you. If they ran it by the book, how is it that 2 suspicious, potentially felony leaks of information happened in both October and January to the New York Times and Washington Post? Is that an example, Mr. Gowdy, of a finely tuned investigation run like the Americans would have wanted, by the way, hidden from Congress? You know, seriously, give me a break. He did nothing but feed the leftist propaganda machine yesterday, and he should go back and clarify those outrageous, absurd remarks.
Well, I think he's obsessing over the definition of spy within the intelligence community versus an informant in an ongoing investigation, which I think is beyond the point. Daniel Goldman, I want to play for you a soundbite from Jason Chaffetz earlier. Let's watch.
Jeff Sessions as the Attorney General is there in name only. He's absolutely worthless. The sooner the president names a new Attorney General, the better. He should never have recused himself. He didn't need to in a counterintelligence operation.
This is, of course, regarding the Trump tweet today, commenting on what Gowdy did say that a lot of us took note of, which is that you could have had any top lawyer be the Attorney General, and meanwhile you pick a guy who everyone likes or liked, but recused himself right off the bat. Your reaction?
Well, I think that the president probably should do his homework a little bit more, because this was an obvious recusal under Department of Justice regulations. This was should not have been a surprise to him or his lawyers. And so the fact that he then announced that he was recusing himself because he was an integral player in the campaign and therefore could not oversee an investigation into the campaign should not have been a surprise. The other problem that I see as a former federal prosecutor about the way that Trump views Sessions and the Attorney General is that he seems to be talking a lot about wanting someone who's loyal to him, which on its face is fine. You know, he gets to choose his cabinet, and I get that. But what he's really indicating and implying in making that statement is that he wants someone loyal to him at the top of the Justice Department who will squash an investigation into either him or his campaign, associates, children, or whatever you have of it.
Well, wait a second. Dan, let me just say this. Was Eric Holder perceived to be loyal to Barack Obama? Because I think you could go through a number of scenarios where you could argue that Eric Holder went above and beyond what the left is now saying Trump should, have the relationship with Sessions. So it seems like that loyalty went real deep between the two of them on whether it was the IRS investigation, how they handled Fast and Furious, how they did the Rosen oversight, whether the president knew anything about any of this, was ever briefed on it. I mean, you couldn't get any information out of these people. So I think loyalty really mattered to Obama at the top of the Justice Department.
I think loyalty in some respects matters, but I think...
Yeah, the president's wingman, he called himself.
Well, I don't know if that's true or not, but...
Yeah, it's true. That's what he called himself.
It's true.
When Trump is saying that he wants loyalty, as a former organized crime prosecutor, I hear something very different.
Okay, yeah.
Well, no, I hear something very different than wanting someone who is close to him, who is loyal to him. The critical difference that I think you have to acknowledge, both of you, is that Barack Obama was not under investigation by the Department of Justice. So whether you like it or not, Dan, he is under investigation. So you have to recognize that there needs to be some division between that investigation into the president and the Department of Justice.
Yeah, well, he also is the chief executive officer of the executive branch of the government, and as chief executive officer, if he wanted to, constitutionally, Dan Bongino, he can fire anyone he wants. Now, whether it's politically appropriate, I think Daniel Goldman is right. It wouldn't be politically appropriate to do that. That would send everyone into a frenzy. But if he decided he wanted to get rid of Comey, he can get rid of Comey. If he decided he wants to get rid of Rosenstein, who was a disaster from the beginning, I would argue you should get rid of Rosenstein. I mean, you can get rid of Sessions if he wants to.
So what you're saying, though, is that he's sorry. What you're saying, though, is he's completely above the law, and that he can fire anybody for corrupt practices.
Dan, you're just making stuff up now, and I wish you would stop doing that. You said before that you want the president, he's looking for someone to quash these investigations. I'm guessing you're not familiar with the details of the case, because it's already open source that the president said multiple times that if there was a Russian intelligence asset in his campaign trying to compromise his campaign, that he wants to know about it. So, Dan, you may be hearing this for the first time, and I'll give you a chance to retract that, but who quashes an investigation while asking the FBI simultaneously to investigate it? I'll wait for your answer on that. You may not know those facts.
He wants a fair investigation, I think. I think he wants it to be fair. I think he wants an attorney general who doesn't melt when the New York Times editorial board gets all upset about a recusal that he never had to do. So I think that's probably what he wants. I think that's what most presidents want. Dan, go ahead.
I mean, look, he had to do it under Department of Justice regulations.
No, he didn't. No, he didn't. Why did
you don't think that he was an integral part of the campaign?
Because Kislyak saw him at a party, and Kislyak, as he did with everybody, stopped at his office.
It has nothing to do with Kislyak.
What did he have to do with Russian collusion? He had zero to do with Russian collusion.
It doesn't have to do with that.
I think that was convenient.
It has to do with the fact that he was an integral part of the campaign, and the campaign was the subject of the investigation, or was involved in the investigation.
A phony investigation on pretextual grounds that was started with a ridiculous informant who was trolling for God knows what.
How do you
for
know that?
Money.
How do you know what the informant was doing?
You're saying that Jeff Sessions was intricately involved in some way in the Russia investigation.
No, I'm not. I'm saying Jeff Sessions was involved in the campaign.
That was a prudential decision that he made, and I would say it was not. I have the regs here. I don't think it was required at all.
All right, read the regs. They're very clear.
How many of the Obama people ever recused themselves? Rarely, if ever.
Because Obama was never investigated.
Well,
I'm not here to defend Obama versus Trump. I'm just saying to you that if there is a confidential informant that has information about wrongdoing in the campaign, I do think this is important.
All right, guys, we'll have you back. Fantastic segment. CNN, by the way, may have to make another major retraction. We'll tell you about it next.